This video is brought to you by OKCoin Crypto Exchange, where you can buy, sell, and trade your favorite cryptocurrencies, and you don't have to pay high fees. OKCoin has very low fees, lower than many of the other crypto exchanges in the market. You can also stake your cryptocurrencies and keep 100% of the rewards. There are no fees. Other exchanges charge fees. OKCoin allows you to keep 100% of the rewards. Sign up with OKCoin, link in the description.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto channel. With me today is Sheila Warren, who's the head of data, blockchain, digital assets, and the deputy head of Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution at the World Economic Forum. Sheila, it's great to be speaking with you.
Thanks. It's so good to be here.
Well, I am excited to speak with you. I have so many questions around what the World Economic Forum is doing, but let's start with your background. Where are you from and where did you grow up?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California, and so I made the trek around the world and landed up in Northern California, so I haven't wound up too far from where I started. And yeah, I'm a lawyer by training, and I've been at the forum now for almost 4 years.
And what did you do before you were at the World Economic Forum?
Well, I started off on Wall Street as a lawyer, and then I moved into charitable law. So the law around how you give money away, how you do that efficiently and effectively, especially across the border. I then was the founder, and so I built a SaaS product called NGO Source, launched that, and then became GC of a big social enterprise called TechSoup, where I'm now on the board. And then that led me into blockchain, went down the rabbit hole, and wound up over here.
Wow. And what was your first encounter with crypto? And you mentioned possibly through your previous role. And what was your aha moment? Like, okay, this actually has legs. This is here to stay.
Yeah, well, it was different for crypto and for kind of Web3 stuff. So I'm actually one of those weirdos who came to the space through the Web3 frame, not actually through the fintech frame. And I was really worried about data storage and security and things like this. And someone said to me, have you thought about, data storage on a blockchain? And I didn't even know what that was. So I researched it a bit and learned more, wound up reading this Toshi white paper, became aware of the connection that, Bitcoin actually has blockchain technology. And I didn't know that. I had heard of Bitcoin, but didn't really know exactly what it was. And yeah, from there, it was just kind of, as so happens, it just kind of snowballed. And next thing I knew, I was in the space full time, and I was just thinking about all the different possible implications for the world economy.
Now, a question I always ask, and it's sometimes not easy for folks or they can't answer it, but what do you hold in your crypto portfolio?
So I will say that I don't really hold much. I wasn't holding before, and it's a very diversified portfolio. And part of that reflects the need for me to be neutral. So oftentimes when I'm doing things, I'm doing it more to learn about how things work, as opposed to because I necessarily am, looking to make a big return on things. I don't have the time to go in and flip like some do. So I just do not have the time for that. So I'm probably a little bit less active in some of that spaces you might think I might be, just because of it, just honestly, because of time commitments. But yeah, I have a very diversified portfolio. Let's leave it at that.
So essentially, you're a hodler. You're not a trader or anything like that.
I am, yeah. And that started off in part because I was really a big believer, and now it's because I'm like, I don't have time to go there and do that.
I mean, I read your title. You're the deputy head of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Tell us about that, because that was so intriguing, because we've had different, obviously, industrial revolutions throughout history. And what did you guys assign that title to what's happening with crypto and blockchain?
Yeah, well, so the idea here is that, the acceleration of the interaction between humans and computers is only getting faster and faster and faster. The pace of that acceleration is just like astronomical, right? And as we see the convergence of various kinds of technology, whether it's AI and machine learning, smart devices, crypto itself, tokenization models, crypto governance in particular, we're seeing this whole new blending of our online and real world identities, appearances, the mere conception of ourselves as people in society and what even is society is changing. And so that differentiates us from kind of the third revolution, this revolution, when we're really seeing computers as tools and we were using them to do things, faster or cheaper, which we're still doing, but we didn't necessarily have as blended of a model as we do now. And so that's what the forum has articulated as the kind of the nexus or basis of the 4IR. And the idea is that it's this convergence of technologies, of which blockchain is a critical one, and crypto is a critical driver, in my view, that's going to get us, to propel us to a brand new place.
Now, as far as the world economics role in this, how is the world economics participation in the market, so to speak? Obviously not selling crypto assets, but are you helping to push the adoption of the technology globally and pushing innovation forward?
Yeah, good question. So, I really see our role is very specific, actually, and it's quite unique in this space because we don't build product, we don't have coin, we don't invest, we don't do anything like that as an institution whatsoever. What we do is we try to articulate where are there opportunities and where are there risks. And we do that with as much evidence base as we can. We try to indicate to those who might be fearful of innovation, I say this beyond even crypto and blockchain, what are the reasonable things to be worried about, and what are things that are just hyped up fears and not real. At the same time, we try to kind of not allow hype artists to run away with everything. We try to make it clear, like, this is new. And so there are going to be risks, and there are things that aren't quite settled yet, or there are things that are being, that are in process of being developed and maturing. So I think we try very hard to be honest and neutral and objective about our depiction of the space. Now, over time, I think it's very, very clear, and I've been saying this since I started here at the forum in 2017, crypto and blockchain are here to stay, not going anywhere. So anyone who thought this was flash in the pan was just wrong. And we said that starting when I took this role, right? I'm the founding member of the whole blockchain team here. So I set the whole strategy and everything else here. That was very clear. That being said, any particular protocol, we don't pick a horse. We are very careful that we don't do that. I see a future, which at least for the next few years is going to be one of a lot of different offerings that have nuanced different value. In the macro sense, they're very similar, but in the micro sense, they're actually very different. And it's not for us or the forum or for me to say who's the winner, who's the loser. That's not our job. Our job is to kind of say there's something about this space that absolutely deserves a lot of attention. It deserves to be regulated, if at all, with caution and with a lot of education behind those who are trying to help shape it, because every little move we make now is like butterfly effect. Any little thing we do now is going to have tremendous influence over the direction and trajectory of this technology. And because I see it as a tool for empowerment and agency, I am personally very interested in making sure that we don't cut off those opportunities for innovation because we are being overly fearful of things that just don't really make sense or aren't true, or are such a tiny risk compared to the possible potential that we're over-indexing on something that we really should just kind of be paying attention to, but maybe not worrying so much about.
Now, you're the World Economic Forum, you have yearly meetings in Davos, you have world leaders attending. Mm-hmm. Are you essentially talking to world leaders, regulators, central banks about all of the things that are happening in the digital asset blockchain movement, whether it be CBDCs, NFTs, crypto, digital assets? Are those conversations happening around the globe?
Yes, they very much are. And part of, again, what we say is, there's a whole host of digital asset offerings. Any one of them might be a particular interest, a particular sector or community or geography. Depends on what you're trying to do. And so what we try to really get people to focus on at this leadership level is like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the pain point? And then you can articulate, does one of these new innovations, and again, I'm speaking just generally about tech innovation, does this make sense for my problem? But a lot of times there's this kind of like rush to the shiny new thing, or we have to do this or that. And we're here to say, that might be the right thing, but you really need to start off with figuring out what is your goal? What are you trying to do? And all too often, that's not the starting point for a lot of engagement.
What has been the sentiment? And well, actually, let me rephrase the question. Which countries do you feel are in the lead right now? And I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm curious. If you could say the top 5 countries that are really, they get it and they have the right regulatory balance.
Yeah, I don't know that I would name a top 5, but I would say that I think there's some approaches that make more sense than others, right? So there were some players who were paying more attention earlier on. I do think that well, Bermuda with its regulatory, regime is pretty powerful. They're making some pretty powerful moves there. You saw Cambodia doing a very early kind of exploration of something that's akin to a CBDC. It's not quite. We saw a lot of activity in ASEAN, the islands, some countries in Africa. And I guess broadly what I want to say is, it's not surprising to me that a lot of frontier economies or high growth economies were more open to engagement with crypto. And we actually saw more adoption because there was something to leapfrog. There was something there that could be improved upon very significantly. It did never surprise me that in the US, you saw less adoption, kind of like, depending on what you're talking about adoption for, right? And from investment side, yes, great, tons of it. But from kind of like a use side, not so much. And that's because the dollar has its own issues, but I mean, it works pretty well. There's not a huge amount of problem for most people who are paying for things using dollar-denominated currency. And as a result, you didn't see necessarily the same excitement around, oh, we have a less volatile currency, because that's not really been the issue in sort of more developed economies. So none of that was surprising. And again, something we've been saying since 2017, or I've been saying, it's just me for the first year, but I've been saying since 2017 was, we're going to see this kind of more growth and interesting experimentation in countries for which there is a more obvious value proposition than in countries that are really well established. Now, the one exception to that, as I again have been saying for a long time, was China. And that's in part because China is just so technically advanced in its digital economy that the psychological leap for people to start using something like digital yuan is really like nil. It's like negligible, right? Whereas in the US, we still have an awful lot of places that really are very cash driven, use physical cash, even during a pandemic, so the adjustment time is going to take a lot longer, and the lead time is going to be longer.
Now, are you seeing a shift in the sentiment among different world leaders and countries from, let's say, like you were saying in 2017, hey, this is here to stay? Do you see like a change and the tide is shifting, that they're more open to the technology?
Yeah, 100%. And I do think that's not entirely, but partially to do with us, for sure. Mm-hmm. We've been having conversations that people would talk to me in 2017, but they were kind of like, it's like in the back room, like quietly, and now those same people will come on major stages with us and have this conversation. So there's been a tremendous shift in the kind of, this is not relegated to the fringe anymore. It's something that everyone is thinking about and wrestling with what to do with it right now. I think that's really interesting because it still remains relatively nascent, and only a pretty small percentage of the world's population really actually engages with crypto, right? So when you think about that, it's interesting to see the attention that it's getting from very, very senior world leaders. And I mean that both on the private and public sector sides. I think that's warranted, but it's interesting how far that pendulum, I think, has swung from being very willing to dismiss this entire space to saying, oh, there's something there. Now, which thing really varies, right? Like some is just like, oh, CBDC, forget crypto, or it's, oh, NFTs are interesting, but forget CBDCs, whatever. It really varies. Nevertheless, there's something that they're hooking into that is really exciting and interesting, for sure.
What are your thoughts on El Salvador, given that they have made one illegal tender? So how do you feel about that? And is that the right model as far as one aspect of adoption?
You have to contextualize these things, right? So do I think El Salvador is going to be like the milkshake that brings all the boys to the yard? I mean, I do not, because I think that there's a lot of political reason why a political leader wouldn't necessarily want to align themselves with leadership in El Salvador. You have to take that into consideration. So even if it proves to be the case that establishing Bitcoin's legal tender, which is something I think is, makes perfect sense, especially in a country like El Salvador, is something others want to replicate, they may hesitate to do that because they don't necessarily want to be associated with that particular leadership. And so you have to contextualize these things. It's not as easy as saying, oh, look, that was some good monetary policy. Let's just go do that, because there are implications to these things. So in terms of what El Salvador means for the world, I tend to be a little bit less bullish on that than I think others are. Like, oh, if you prove it there, you can prove it anywhere. Well, that's not really true, right? Now, that being said, I think what's happening there is really interesting. I think it's quite important. I think it merits paying attention to. But I also think we have to be very honest about the fact that not everybody is necessarily oriented towards community engagement in the same way. People have different philosophies about these kinds of things that are going to be embedded in the design that they make, the choices they make about what crypto ends up looking like and the kind of pattern of engagement they want to see in their country. And those are things that we should not ignore because we think we see something that is net positive, right? That we have to be very mindful of the context and the nuance there. So all in all, I think it's an important experiment. It's something that we are paying attention to. I don't comment on it much, in part because, I think there is a broader context to it that is really important to take into consideration. And I feel like the rhetoric about it is either super positive or super negative, and very few people are kind of where I think they ought to be, which is acknowledging that both things can be true at the same time.
Sure. And to your point, it is an experiment. We still have to see how this plays out.
That's right.
Crash or burn, or it may do well. But it's waiting and seeing how things.
And again, that's the whole point, right? If it does crash and burn, I don't think that means that, it's a failure, it could never work. That's not what that means, right? It means that particular experiment maybe didn't make sense. Similarly, if it takes root and blows up and is amazing, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone can do that either, right? it is a pretty localized experiment in its own way. And so we shouldn't read more into it than I think is actually warranted by what's actually happening on the ground.
You recently put out a paper, and I was certainly reading through it, Navigating Cryptocurrency Regulation. I'm not going to read the subtitle because it's
very long, yeah.
Tell me about this, and why did you decide to put together, and who participated as well?
Yeah, so I was able to create this past year what we call a Global Futures Council on cryptocurrencies. We have various Global Futures Council on different topics. We had one on space tech, there's one on bioeconomy, there's one on XR, but we created one on cryptocurrencies because we thought this is something that's really important. And so what these are is they bring together industry leaders, so people from across the spectrum, but all of whom are pretty much bullish on crypto. But it's really unusual to get all these factions together, right? We saw some of this happening with the work on the Senate infrastructure bill, where communities came together, set aside their differences, and kind of said, we need to kind of align around, our approach. We had a group together doing that for almost a year. And so what that group decided, the groups are we co-create with them. They tell us, we listen, we kind of allow them to kind of have a wide latitude in terms of what they think is going to help move things forward. They decided there needed to be some kind of unified statement, if you will, about regulation of cryptocurrencies and what that might look like. And that made sense to us because a lot of different groups had put this forth, that they were very focused on their own agenda. Like they had a certain kind of direction they're trying to push, which is perfectly their right, but it's not exactly neutral, at all, right? So this is less neutral than most of our output. It did come from the council, not from my team, because it is very pro crypto. And so we try to be more balanced in the work that we put out from the World Economic Forum team to say, we are generally very positive on crypto, but there are these other considerations. This piece was very, very pro-crypto because it's come from the entire industry. But what it says is, as you think about regulation of this space, which again, we take as potentially net positive, right? Like there are things about regulation that are challenging, things about that regulation that are actually would be great and clarifying. Here's what we are seeing collectively. So to get to that kind of consensus is not easy. To get people who are competitors in some cases to agree is not easy. So we thought it was a very powerful signal. There's openness to being regulated. There's understanding of why that could be helpful and important, understanding of what would not be helpful, it would stifle innovation. And it's all kind of laid out in the piece that was co-authored by members of the council.
Now, absolutely, I agree with you, and a lot of people in the crypto market would agree. We need regulations. There are scammers out there. There's people looking to take advantage of people. I've seen some in the early days of the crypto market. But in the United States, there seems to be a lack of clarity, and it seems a bit of overreach, where maybe they're trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of eyes are on the SEC, Gary Gensler, the lawsuit against Ripple over XRP. What are your thoughts, given from your perspective of the World Economic Forum?
Well, it's certainly a hot time for regulation in the United States. I mean, there's no question about that, right? I mean, there's a lot going on, a lot of different points of view, some of which are a little bit mystifying to me, frankly, because some of these are very smart people, and some of them I know, and they're very smart people, and they're saying things that just don't seem particularly well informed, which is surprising. Some of which I think is extremely well informed and quite sophisticated, actually, in its understanding of what's going on. It's, again, I'm not going to opine on kind of any particular policy or direction that's coming out, except to say, another thing we've been saying for a very long time is regulations coming. This whole idea that we can't be regulated, we're unregulatable, or whatever, that makes no sense. It's utter nonsense. And so I'm in a way, a little smug, I must say, about the fact that we kind of knew it was coming and now it's here, right? Now, that being said, it's not our place, necessarily to push and advocate on behalf of the crypto lobby. There are groups that do that. We are not one of those. We're not a lobbying association by any stretch of the imagination. What we do is we try to convey, again, this educational objective information, usually behind the scenes, to some of these policymakers when they request it. There are times that we do a push, like if we publish a big piece of guidance, like our DeFi Policymakers Toolkit, we will send that proactively. But most of the time, it's them reaching out to us and asking for, objective information about things. And so either we respond ourselves or we connect them to people, usually in kinds of panels that we trust, to give a sufficiently nuanced description of what's happening. So, I think my hope is that education will continue and that a lot of these conversations will continue to happen, that there will be an understanding that a lot of regulation is premature, and premature regulation is what I stay up at night worrying about, because, again, I'm really focused on user and community empowerment. That's what I care about the most. And I worry that if we try to make crypto look like things that already exist, we're going to wind up mirroring the same parallel structures that have enabled some people to get very, very wealthy and other people to be left behind. And I really am concerned that we're going to wind up doing that, because we're just going to wind up in a world where, if we make something quack like a duck, then suddenly we start thinking it's a duck and we forget that actually, it was a pigeon or whatever. It's just fell apart. But you know what I'm saying, right? Like if you put water in a box, it looks like a box. You know what I mean? So I have a lot of concerns about that, but it remains to be seen what those who are in those positions decide to do.
And, obviously you're based in the United States. I'm based in the United States. Do you think Congress needs to step in to get the regulators in line and kind of like what they did in the 90s, and providing balanced regulation to let the internet grow and innovation to foster? That needs to happen now. Congress needs to go to work.
Well, I definitely think that what's confusing about this time, and a lot of people analogize this to the early days of the internet, and I think that's appropriate in some ways. The difference, I think, is that there's confusion about what's the technology and what's the application. And so here, people are coming in. I think regulators are saying, well, we're just trying to regulate, the applications and the holding of crypto. We're not trying to regulate the technology, but it's not quite that simple. That's not exactly how it works. So it's complicated, right? And so I think that there's still a lot of nuanced understanding about, how do these things work? What does it mean to run a node? Just complexity around this. So it isn't so much like who acts or doesn't act. It's more, who is really taking the time to understand the details and specifics of what's happening here, and then can feed that knowledge through to other agencies or administrators or regulators or politicians or whomever it is who have this kind of power to, very dramatically, at least in the United States, shape the trajectory of this particular innovation. So it's less about who does that and more that someone kind of needs to be, the watchdog within the political infrastructure.
Got it. Now, I had a question about Ripple, because I've seen some of their documents on the World Economic Forum website. I've seen Brad Garlinghouse participate in the Global Future Council of Cryptocurrencies. I'm assuming along with Ripple and many other companies in the crypto market you're working with, can you talk a bit about the working relationship that you formed with these folks?
Yeah, so the relationship is very similar for everybody. We invite people to join our councils. This was for the GFC of cryptocurrencies, is what you're talking about, because they reflect different points of view and they were different places in the ecosystem, right? So now you've had SEC investigating Uni. Similarly, we had Marvin Amori, who is the GC of Uniswap Labs on the Cryptocurrency Council, right? So that's not a criteria necessarily for us, because that can change at any time. So for us, it's more who's been in this space for a while, who has a point of view. Those points of view are very different. If you look through the membership of our GFC, it's a lot of different people from all over the ecosystem, right? It's some people who are within banks, it's some people within payments companies, it's some people who are with protocol companies or companies that are managing protocol. it is meant to be a very diverse cross section. So, you know, for us, I don't actually remember the exact timing of this, but I'm fairly certain we closed the list of who we were inviting before any of that happened. And for us, that wasn't a reason necessarily to, you know, not engage, because I think that's, if anything, really interesting to kind of be, you know, able to talk to a company that's dealing with that. There's going to be more and more of it, I think. You know, I think that was one of the first shots across the bow, if you will, and there's going to be more and more and more. So I think that people should probably be, well, crypto Twitter should generally be a little more gracious than it tends to be. It's kind of what they all just put out there as a general, Twitter in general, you know, they'll put out there. But I also think that, you know, I certainly don't have inside information onto anything that goes down with any of these companies in that way, that they aren't willing to share, you know, with me. It all comes from them. I don't work at any of these places, so I know what they tell me. And this stuff is really complicated when you're navigating through a world that doesn't have clear lines of engagement. You're gonna someone's gonna step over them, you know. It's just a matter of like a little bit. I think it's a little bit like, who does that wind up being and when? And so much of that is coincidence and whether that's luck, you know? So anyhow, my point is, our group I'm really proud of because it represents a huge diversity of points of view and different stages of evolution within the ecosystem. And I think that that's actually what makes it really powerful and what makes our particular output from that council quite powerful.
So a couple more questions before we wrap it up here.
Yeah.
What is your 5-year outlook for this market and all the moving parts, all the bells and whistles, NFTs, CBDCs, crypto, digital assets, tokenization of assets, and so forth? You know, where do you see us in about 5 years? I know that's a loaded question.
If I knew that, you know, I mean, look, I think, again, I could just double down on saying, you know, it's not going anywhere. I do think that some things are going to evolve, you know, maybe they merge or maybe they die out or maybe other things become strong. You know, I have my own guesses, but they're just guesses on what that might be. But, you know, again, I don't act on any of that because no one really knows. I don't think anybody can predict any of these things. And we really are in a very uncertain time. You know, if the SEC, for example, does make certain moves, that's going to favor some things over other things, right? And would those be the things the community might have favored? Maybe not. I don't really know. We don't know what they're going to do, right? So a lot of these things are very fraught at this moment in time. And all we can do, I think, is just put heads down, keep building, you know, focus on trying to do right by communities and users. I think that's really important. I think a demonstration of good faith there is going to be really critically important, you know, to regulators who do come knocking. Like, I think there are differences in the way that certain kinds of protocols operate. You know, I think there are differences in the way exchanges operate. You know, I think there are some places that the optics matter, but I think also the reality of intention really matters. And that's not that hard to suss out. So I would say it behooves all of us to really be, you know, why are we in this? If we're in it to make a lot of money, well, at some point that might come crashing down. If you're in it because you really care about empowering people, that's a different, more noble goal. And I would like to think that 5 years from now, we'll move tremendously forward in that goal. And we'll be in a world where a lot of people didn't have access to what we consider basic services, have them. And we've kind of raised standards of living around the entire world. That's certainly the world that I want to see.
Absolutely. Okay, quick rapid fire questions as we wrap it up here.
Sure.
Favorite food?
Favorite food? Oh my gosh, ice cream, definitely.
Favorite musician or band?
Oh my God. You know, this is like so embarrassing, but on rotation right now constantly is Fleetwood Mac Rumors. I listen to that album, which is so basic, but I listen to it constantly. It's very relaxing for me.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? God, what's my favorite movie? The last movie I saw was Luca with my kids, but my personal favorite movie is probably The Godfather Part 2. I really love that movie.
Awesome. Favorite book?
Oh, that's so easy. Right now, I'm obsessed with a book called Exit West. It's about refugees. I can't stop thinking. I finished it about a month ago. I cannot stop thinking about it. I just finished reading it for the second time. So that's my current favorite book. But, you know, it changes a lot. I read a lot.
I got to check that one out. And finally, when you're not at the World Economic Forum, what are you doing for fun as a hobby?
I'm hanging out with my kids. That's really all I do. I work and I hang out with my kids. That's about it. I don't have time for anything else.
Well, Sheila, thank you so much for joining me today. And I appreciate your time and hope to have you back on as you release new reports.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.